It seems to be open attack week on immigration or immigrants in this province. The other day, our immigration minister, he is still the immigration minister, said that 80% of immigrants who come to Quebec don't work, don't speak French, have no interest in adapting Quebec values, and end up living in Montreal, 80% of them. And, of course, the facts, the real numbers, the Statistics Canada numbers prove that's not even close to being the case. We heard from a variety of immigrants when we asked for calls yesterday. You might like to hear this, by the way. I thought these were quite compelling. People who, I think the question, Natasha, we said was, what would you like to say? What would you like to tell the immigration minister that he clearly does not appear to know? And we got some really interesting calls. If you want to hear the whole segment, by the way, you can go to our homepage at cjd800.com.
It's under the audio section, and just be prepared to shed a tear or two. The stories are heart-wrenching and heartfelt.
Here are just a couple of them, Brian.
I came in 1988, and I worked so hard that up until now I have 35 years in the same job. And to hear these things is unacceptable. I had never been in unemployment. It's very, very aggravating to hear comments like that about immigrants.
I came to this beautiful country in 2014. I speak 4 languages. I have a roofing company which I employ between 9 and 12 people, and all are immigrants from Mexico, El Salvador, and Guatemala. And all those immigrants work 12 hours, and they work hard to be here, and we are happy to be in this beautiful country who opened the arms to us. God bless Canada.
I came in Canada in 2008 as a student. I barely spoke any word of French. I had to take French classes at night. I definitely didn't come here for a free ride. Today I'm a business owner, and I pay taxes. 40% of my taxes go to this province, so I just find it very, very insulting to say that immigrants are free riders.
Just some of the calls we got, and you can hear the emotion, I think, in all those voices. So, look, that's the description from people who are those immigrants that the minister was referring to. Hardworking, learning French, speaking French, some not living here, living in other places across the province. Neil DRABKIN served as a senior policy advisor to a former federal immigration minister. He's an immigration lawyer now. And Neil, we've spoken before. I wanted, first of all, to get your take, before we even delve into what the real situation is on the ground, to what you heard from Jean Boulet yesterday.
Well, clearly his statement is outrageous and far removed from reality. If he read the history books, he'd know that immigrants have built this country, and with a declining birth rate and aging population, they'll continue to build this country well into the future. And, there's this obsession with who's going to protect the French language, expressed on his part and part of the Premier. And I would say, who's going to protect our economy and social programs that immigrants pay for? Maybe they should start focusing on that important question. So far, they haven't. But, the minister's statements are pretty consistent with the narrative that have already been set by the Premier a couple of weeks ago. In fact, he said that immigrants are extremists who engage in criminality. And this minister has just completed his sentence by saying that they don't learn French, they don't integrate, and they don't work. So it's part of the same narrative, and that's why I don't understand why the Premier is so upset with his minister. In fact, if his minister no longer qualifies to be immigration minister of this province, then Mr. Legault, you no longer qualify to be Premier.
Well, and on the same day, Neil, he made those remarks that having more immigrants, or more than the 50,000 immigrants that we now take in Quebec, would be akin to suicide. I couldn't agree with you more. It starts at the top and then it just festers from there. Tell us about the reality. You heard how heartbroken so many of our listeners, our callers, were to be told that they're lazy, that they're looking for a free ride. What is the reality of the immigrants you've encountered coming here to start a new life?
Natasha, I would argue the contrary. Not taking higher levels of immigrants would be suicidal because of the issues that I just discussed, our social programs, our economy. The fact is that immigrants come to this province. They take jobs that other Quebecers don't want to take. They fill those posts. They serve on our front lines. The vast majority of nurses in our hospitals are from other countries. Filipino nurses are trying to pass qualifications to be able to work in our hospitals, and they're doing diligent jobs in that regard. They come, start small and medium-sized businesses that employ other Quebecers, and they pay taxes that pay for those social programs. They come here with millions of dollars and invest in projects here. So this is the story of immigrants, the success story of immigrants. So I don't know what history book these guys have been reading, but it's certainly unconnected with reality. There are a lot of success stories, and a lot of people who aired their stories on the program are quite right. Immigrants are fundamentally important for the continued vitality of this province, in fact, the vitality of the country.
I want to turn to something else, because you've heard by now that all the other political leaders came out against this across the board, which we would have expected, including Eric Duhem, who in the clip we played yesterday, I think, said he found what Jean Boulet had said, his words, pathetic. But then when questioned about what he wanted to do, his final, the statement he had made years ago about wanting to build a wall at Roxham Road. Now, he made the point when he brought that up of saying that it's one thing to talk about immigrants and it's another to talk about those trying to come into the country illegally. And I know we've had sort of a difference of opinion on whether that's illegal or what does the federal government frame it as, Neil? What do they use?
Irregular.
Irregular crossings.
It's a nice word, Aaron, but it's not reality.
So what is reality? Because how can you on the one hand say immigrants should not be talked about this way, yet on the other hand want to deal with those people who happen to be crossing the border that way by saying that you want to put up a wall to prevent them from coming here?
Well, I think it's important to differentiate between immigrants who are waiting in line, playing by the rules. In some cases, they're waiting months, they're waiting years to come to Quebec and invest, work, do what they said they would do. And those refugee would-bes who are crossing in illegally on Roxham Road, who are skipping the queue, going right to the front of the line, saying that they're refugees, when in the vast majority of the cases they are not bona fide refugees. That's being determined by our refugee courts, and trying to cheat the system by staying here during that period when it takes a long time to determine whether they're in fact bona fide, and milking off the system. And ultimately, when they are refused their refugee status, being asked to return if we can still find them. So yes, there's a distinction that must be drawn between immigrants who are contributing, working hard, playing by the rules, and those who are coming from the United States. Aaron and Natasha, last time I checked, there was no civil war going on in Plattsburgh. And therefore, if people feel that they have a refugee claim to be made coming from the United States, that is where they need to make that claim. Otherwise, they're saying, well, you know what, we're going to go shopping here. And Canada sounds pretty good. Once we cross in, our bags will be carried, and we avail ourselves of all kinds of programs. And we'll be there quite a long time before it's determined whether we're a refugee. My message to these people are, if you're a refugee, if you're a real refugee, make your claim in the United States of America. They adhere to the same principles of the United Nations that Canada does. And the fact that they don't make their claim there tells me a lot about them. So what I'm talking about here are immigrants coming to the country, waiting in line, playing by the rules, and making rich contributions to Canada.
Okay, so I think, we can agree that they skipped the queue and that maybe that's not fair, but their intentions, I think, are still ultimately to come here and build a better life for themselves. Is that not the case? I don't think they're coming looking for a free ride. They want to work hard and they want to build a better life.
And if that is the case, Natasha, and it's a good point that you make, then let them apply at one of our embassies or missions abroad, where all the other people who want to build a life for themselves here and who are contributing have to wait. I don't think you'd find it fair if you were waiting in line for whatever the case may be, and you had been waiting for hours and you were in line perhaps for a passport, and then all of a sudden someone came to the front of the line and said, you know what, can you let me in, please? And they said, oh, of course, come right this way.
Okay, Neil,
it's patently unfair.
You're right. And I think people get that, but my question is, what are you supposed to do with the program that exists right now? Because from my understanding, it's not Canada that has the ultimate decision here. It's one that has to be reached between Canada and the U.S., and apparently the Americans are in no rush to change this. Is that wrong?
Well, the Americans have signaled that they're willing to change it, and there are other mechanisms available to Canada to be able to deal with the issue. We've discussed before hiring more immigration judges, refugee judges, who can make faster determinations. If that were the case, then I don't think as many people would come here who know that they won't be here that long. The message that would go out is, fine, you can come, but the determination of your case will be made in short order. And so there's not going to be months and years for this process to take place. Mm-hmm. That's one. Also, there's other parts of the Constitution that would help. In fact, the notwithstanding clause, this is what it was designed for. The notwithstanding clause was designed for exceptional situations where Canada needs to invoke it in order to prevent the situation that we're seeing. now, under the law, as soon as you step on Canadian soil, if you utter the word refugee, you're entitled to this process. But under legislation, the government can introduce, if they invoke the notwithstanding clause, and in this case for a good reason, that would not be the case. The claimants would have to go back to the United States and make their claim there. And that would cut off the flow immediately.
Okay.
So there are other mechanisms available to the government that it can use unilaterally without the consent of the United States that would allow them to address the situation. I would just like to point out that hundreds of millions of dollars has been expended on this program that the government has not signaled it's going to put an end to for years.
Okay. I just want to come back to Boulet's comments to close. I feel like I just need to hear from you one more time how egregious, just how inaccurate the reality that he depicted is. It's not at all what the truth is about an immigrant's reality here, is it?
Absolutely not. The vast majority of cases are success stories of people who've come here with nothing but the clothes on their back. And in many cases have built successful businesses, have successful careers, and have made a contribution. And that's why people are very emotional when they hear the minister speaking about them this way. This is not what immigration is. Immigration is the contribution to a country to help build its economy, its social programs, and the pride that people take in doing that. And the vast majority of those who've come here have contributed in that regard to Canada. Canada is a country, as I said before, that has been built by immigrants, and very proud immigrants who've made all kinds of strides, from into vast businesses that employ all kinds of Canadians. So why the minister would say, although as I said, it's consistent with the Premier have said, would say this. This is a terrible message to be sending around the world. At a time when countries are welcoming immigrants and competing for the brightest minds, that the minister and the Premier of this province have said basically, immigrants need not apply. That should be on the front page of their platform. Immigrants need not apply. I mean, how much more evidence do we need that these two guys really don't want immigrants to come to this province?
Neil DRABKIN, Montreal immigration lawyer. Neil, thank you so much. Appreciate the time today.
You're welcome.